Kevin McCarthy is out, and the ensuing chaos mainlines directly back to an episode of The Mary Tyler Moore Show. I'll get to that in a moment, but the real lead story did not happen in Washington yesterday. Which idiot Republican becomes the new future former Speaker of the House does not much matter. The real lead story is in Trump's phone, because the real lead story is summarized by the phrase, "and now we wait." Turns out that not only did Judge Arthur Engoron issue a gag order against Trump, the second gag order, he has a partial gag order in the classified documents case too, hours after Trump attacked the clerk of Engoron's courtroom yesterday, but Engoron issued a gag order against Trump less than a day after he had warned Trump's lawyers informally that their client needed to shut the F up. Engoron, of whom they should be installing a statue outside his courthouse soon, provided a template for Judge Tanya Chutkan for a week from next Monday. Judge Engoron not only gagged Trump, but how he gagged him also gags Junior Trump and Eric the Idiot Trump, too. Quote, "Personal attacks on members of my court staff are unacceptable, inappropriate, and I won't tolerate it. Consider this statement a gag order forbidding all parties from posting, emailing, or speaking publicly about any of my staff." As the New York fraud trial closed for the day, a pre-scheduled Trump fundraising email went out and probably just missed violating the brand new gag order. "I just finished the second day of my sham trial in New York. For the past 2 days, I sat in a courtroom and I listened to the Democrats fervently try to destroy everything my family and I have built," unquote. Trump attacks the trial's process, claims it is a political event, but he does not mention anybody by name. At nightfall, Trump then posted on social media what was for him a limp and tepid criticism of the law under which he is being tried, which he tagged with a generic and not at all spicy criticism, quote, "This was done by radical left Marxist design." But you can see him edging closer back to his usual bile. And I suspect this is just a matter of time. As I posited yesterday, Trump's entire worldview is predicated on the idea that there are no rules he cannot get around. He certainly will test the judge. The only question is how much and how soon and how the judge responds. There were reports last night, apparently drawn from an interpretation of New York statutes, that anybody violating any New York judge's gag order might be liable for fines or for a stricter gag order or even for 30 days behind bars. This quickly morphed into reports in places like the Hollywood publication Deadline that Engoron had threatened to put Trump in jail for 30 days. Well, here's hoping he does that, or 330 days, but he has not done that yet. He threatened only, quote, serious sanctions, and he left that up to Trump's imagination. What is fascinating here is the subtext, because rarely do we see Trump's imagination in action. Rarely do we see so concisely and so clearly how bad the cracks in Trump's brain really are. A week ago this morning, a crass Twitter account with all of 239 followers attacked Judge Engoron's clerk because she had run for a seat on civil court in New York and was endorsed by the organization Manhattan Democrats. An hour later, this same account grabbed a photo from the clerk's Instagram page showing her, in what was an apparent fan photo, standing next to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. She was the fan, and the senator apparently did not even know who she was. Even now, with all the subsequent publicity, 2 separate tweets asking, why is Judge Engoron's principal law clerk palling around with Chuck Schumer, they have gotten fewer than 500 retweets. Somehow, that tweet got in front of Trump's twitching eyeballs, and he jumped from the reality, which is a photo of a random cog in the Manhattan judicial system asking Chuck Schumer to pose with her, to this fevered production of Trump's own malignant brain. Quote, Schumer's girlfriend is running this case against me. How disgraceful. This case should be dismissed immediately. He then provided a link to the woman's Instagram page, which she then had to make private. It's Trump's insanity in real time. A random photo of a random court clerk is blown up by a troll account, and not very well blown up, an account that previously had accused the judge of being a, quote, hobo who was drinking gin during the trial. It's been blown up from that into palling around with Chuck Schumer, and Trump then blew that up, turned that into the clerk being Schumer's, quote, girlfriend, and the deranged assertion that she was running this case, and the hyperbole on top of hyperbole on top of hyperbole that the case should be dismissed immediately. Of course, Trump's people do not need anything but his word to believe anything or to pretend to believe anything, as long as he can invent evidence of his perpetual martyrdom and victimhood. He can take anything he finds and turn it into a weapon, even if the judge then makes him delete that weapon. The larger meanings, though, are pretty obvious. On the opening day of this fraud trial, Judge Engoron said he expected it to continue into December. Trump himself is not expected to testify for several weeks yet. Whether he continues to milk the trial for pity and cash every day by showing up to the New York courtroom remains to be seen. Whether the attorneys or his idiot adult kids can convince him to control himself online and in front of microphones remains to be seen. But December is 8 long weeks from now, and Trump has the restraint of a 4-year-old or of a cat or of a 4-year-old cat. And then, of course, there is October 16th and what that means for October 16th. The date is already marked historically by the birth of Angela Lansbury and the death of Marie Antoinette. Now, it will feature the hearing in Judge Tanya Chutkan's courtroom about what kind of restraint, what gag order, or alternate for a gag order she will impose on Trump. Because since Jack Smith first filed asking for one, Trump has said that someone whom Smith now identifies as a witness in that case, General Mark Milley, was guilty of a crime that previously would have been punishable by death. Trump has told his hordes that they should, quote, go after Attorney General Letitia James of New York. And now he has thrown into chaos the life of a woman whose greatest transgression was thinking that a photo of herself standing next to Chuck Schumer was worth the effort involved to post it online. I'll go through what I'm expecting here yet again. I apologize for that, but I can't emphasize enough that this federal case, that gag order hearing, could be an extraordinary turning point, an extraordinary crisis, in fact, in American history. The New York case and that gag order could conceivably end up with Trump being found in contempt of court and ordered incarcerated for some days. But the federal case, it's a federal case. Trump is not out on bail in New York. He is out on bail in Washington. A violation of that bail, which is what Jack Smith's filings are all about, can and often is met by a judge revoking the bail, especially if it involves threatening the witnesses, to say nothing of buying a gun or even just pretending to buy a gun. I would expect Judge Chutkan to, at the hearing on the 16th, or after taking some time to consider what happens during the hearing on the 16th, I would expect her to walk right up to the line of jailing Trump, but not doing it. If there is a way for her to create a mechanism by which she establishes draconian restrictions on his social media and personal commentary on the case and the witnesses and the prosecutors and herself and their motives and everything else, if she can do that and then show it leading to automatic pre-announced punishments for him if he breaks those rules, like maybe a huge fine for the first offense, then revocation of bail and being put in prison for the second or the 70th, who knows. I think she'll do that. She will be explicit, and she will also make sure the onus is not on herself to later rule that he must be imprisoned. She will put the onus on him to imprison himself. If you do this, you are going to jail. Then when it happens, she had nothing to do with it. And not to exhaust you by repetition, but the question then becomes, what happens when he does it anyway? The New York trial before Judge Engoron is ultimately most valuable because what we just saw was the if-then scenario playing out in real time. Engoron did not just issue a gag order because Trump attacked the clerk yesterday. He had warned him via his lawyers, informally but clearly, and 12 hours later, Trump did it anyway. With whatever Tanya Chutkin tells Trump not to do, he will, soon or late, do it anyway. That is his madness. And then what happens? The marshals go to get him, and they shoot it out with the Secret Service. The Secret Service is withdrawn beforehand, so Trump gets private armed security. There's almost an infinite number of different endgame scenarios, and there is only one we can be certain will not happen, which would be Trump surrendering himself to be jailed without confrontation. His broken brain does not work that way. That a lot of us have always feared that this would be the only way all of it could possibly end up does not change the fact that it still is a nightmare scenario. Well, we will get enough hints in the next week and a half, courtesy of Judge Engoron and the gag order, and whichever conspiracy theory Trump thinks he can get away with launching to distract from the reality that he is guilty of fraud. We will get more hints, and we will get maybe a conclusion on Monday the 16th. And then, as they say, that's when it gets interesting. There is, in fact, another Trump story that is also more important than how many speakers of the House the Republicans will burn through before the end of the calendar year, or maybe the month. Trump's default setting is irrational stupidity. We know that. He speaks to that quality in millions of our brethren who in olden times would have been left back in school for decades. But again, when it comes to the subject of money, he gets even more irrational and more stupid. This is what he said before the post about the clerk, before the gag order, before day 2 of the fraud trial. See if you can spot the stupid.
Such as Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, being worth $18 million when in fact it's much closer to $1.5 billion.
So, Trumpy, Mar-a-Lago is worth $1.5 billion? Not 3 years after the tax assessors of Palm Beach County, Florida decided it was worth $26 million? And Trump protested that was too high? And he appealed, and then he withdrew the appeal and he agreed, nah, you're right, it's worth $26 million? So he owes back taxes on the difference, which is $1,474 million. I mean, even in terms of what Trump claimed to banks that Mar-a-Lago was worth, he was still skinning the tax man. The prosecution in the fraud case says Trump told them, the banks, $490 million. If that's true, he was still shorting the tax assessment in Florida by $1,010 million. I mean, if I'm in the government of Palm Beach County, I'm definitely looking into this now. Thanks for saying it on camera, moron. And one more Trump legal note that is not about Jack Smith or Arthur Engoron or Trump's social media accounts. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution matter-of-factly reported that, quote, Fulton County prosecutors are floating plea deals to a number of defendants in the election interference case involving Trump, according to people with knowledge of the proposals, unquote. The AJC reminds us Scott Hall already got one of these plea deals. He was involved in the voting records breach out in the sticks. The paper also mentions Trump Election Day chieftain Michael Roman, whose lawyer says he said no thanks, he's innocent. And it says Fonnie Willis's office has also approached, quote, people who were indicted for their alleged roles in the appointment of a slate of Trump electors, election data breach in Coffee County, and harassment of Fulton poll worker Ruby Freeman. That's a lot of people. And if you think the Atlanta case is moving quickly, you better sit down. Jury selection for round 1, the trials of Kenneth Chesebro and Sidney Powell. Jury selection starts in 16 days. Okay, so now Kevin McCarthy You've been waiting patiently for your obituary. Here goes. 50 years ago next Friday, on episode 5 of season 4 of the Mary Tyler Moore Show on CBS, Lou Grant said it to Mary Richards. It seemed like a throwaway line from an exceptional sitcom. I've always remembered it. I had no idea the half-century anniversary was coming up. And it's not a throwaway line from an exceptional sitcom. It is, in fact, the first rule of usurpation and insurrection. And as Lou Grant said, good broadcasting. Quote, "You never fire your old sportscaster," he told her, "until you've hired your new sportscaster." House Republican radicals caught the proverbial car they have been chasing, and they have no idea what to do next, and they look like idiots. 3 decades of being nearly unbeaten in pure political street fighting skills out the window because these morons did not remember the Lou Grant sportscasting rule. The actual half-century anniversary, October 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern, the episode called Hi There, Sports Fans, may in fact come and go without these clowns naming anybody as the new speaker, or worse yet, and in many constructions maybe more likely, they will already have elected somebody speaker and managed to fire him too. And maybe they can just rotate it once a week like they do prime ministers of Italy or managers of the New York Mets. The offing of Kevin McCarthy is actually notable only because A, it underscores the reality that the Republicans have bluster and the novelty of having opened, the Pandora's box of American fascism and American political violence. But they don't have any leaders, as evidenced by B, Kevin McCarthy saying on Face the Nation 2 days before his friends garroted him that he would survive and they should bring it on. And now that's probably the worst political TV interview of our time. Unless you include Prince Andrew's 2019 sit-down with Emily Maitlis of the BBC, which could have only gone worse if he had been arrested in the middle of it. Leading to C, McCarthy's epic news conference last night in which he compared Vladimir Putin to Hitler in the 30s. Yeah, I guess that's impressive. I think the comparison actually is Hitler in the 30s and Trump right now. Let's see him say that. And then McCarthy turned things over to Patrick McHenry, the little scumbag in the bow tie who promptly ordered Nancy Pelosi to vacate her special hideaway office by today because it will be reassigned. She's in California for the funeral of Dianne Feinstein, and he, McHenry, is a little weasel. And all of it concluding with D, McCarthy's only actual accomplishment. He lasted 270 days on the job, 12 days more than the record holder for shortest speakership ever, poor Michael C. Kerr of the Indiana 3rd, who was taken by consumption on August 19, 1876, having presided over exactly one session of the 44th Congress. Actually, it occurs to me that I'm still assuming an awful lot about the Republicans and McCarthy here in saying that this ouster is indeed the conclusion of his career or anything else. House Republicans are incompetent enough, and McCarthy is vengeful and vain enough that though he said last night he will not run again for Speaker, and he salted the earth and he burned the bridges. Hell, I've done that. He might still get the job back. Trust me, especially if they actually give Elise Stefanik or this clown McHenry or another one of these goobers a shot at it. And especially if McCarthy really would turn around and make a deal with the Democrats this time, predicated on aid for Ukraine and some palatable fix for the actual problems on the border, and most importantly, giving McCarthy the chance to metaphorically attack Matt Gaetz's privates with pruning shears every day through the next election, and in the process turn him into some kind of, congressional Sisyphus, only making it hurt more. Also of interest here, Campbell Brown is out at Meta And there's a story about her and CNN and how they hired her when they couldn't hire me, and her colleague at Meta. Her name is in the news too, Ann Kornblut, and that story is even better because her name invokes Savannah Guthrie because Ann's husband left her to marry Savannah Guthrie, and then somebody at MSNBC had Savannah interview Ann. Ooh, that's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on Countdown, the baseball playoffs are underway, and there are a lot of things I could predict, but I'm going to stick to one of them, one prediction alone. There will not be a riot during any of these games, because there was a riot in 1999, and I was not only covering it, I was in the middle of it, on the field, until security threatened to have me arrested. Things I promised not to tell coming up. First time for the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, Campbell Brown, former NBC News correspondent and one of the many, many former 8 p.m. hosts at CNN. I was reminded, literally I had forgotten, that she was head of news for Facebook and then Meta. She got nothing done. They abandoned producing and promulgating real news, and now it is reported she's leaving the company. Campbell Brown's first gig at NBC was as one of the regular White House correspondents during my first MSNBC show there, The White House in Crisis, in 1998. As a correspondent, she had great hair. In 2006, CNN President John Klein offered me CNN's 8 p.m. show and the chance to bring my staff with me over there, and then he got overruled by his boss, a man named Jim Walton. And Jim Walton, 25 years earlier, had been the backup graphics guy on my little 4-minute afternoon sportscast on CNN. Not the graphics guy. He was the backup graphics guy. Became head of CNN Worldwide. They have trouble with filling that job. Klein told Walton that he was making an existential mistake, that they had a chance to put MSNBC out of business by hiring me away from them, and then using me to take on Fox News. And instead, Klein told him, it would now end up with him hiring somebody lesser at 8 p.m. And then Klein said Walton would fire him, Klein. And then Klein said somebody would in turn fire Walton. All of which happened. And the person they hired instead of me was Campbell Brown. I kicked her hair in the ratings. Campbell Brown and I co-anchored the Weekend Today show one Sunday, about 2005, and she never stopped smoking cigarettes during it. I was a cigar smoker at the time, and even I was overcome by this smell. We were on, I think, for 2 hours. I think she must have had 60 cigarettes. She didn't finish all of them, but 60 cigarettes is 60 cigarettes. Every time she was not on camera, Campbell Brown lit up a cigarette. They opened a door to the street for her. She went outside during the commercials. They surrounded her with fans. Never seen anything like it. A year later, I ran into her at Gabriel's restaurant here, and the guy she was with was president of ABC News. I didn't know him. He introduced himself. He was lovely to me. And Campbell, who I had worked with for 10 years by this point, co-anchored a show. She said, "Hello, you?" The runner-up, Ann Kornblut. Now, Ann didn't do anything wrong here. It's just easiest for me if I put her in this part of the show. If anything, she is the victim here. Turns out, Ann Kornblut, formerly of the Washington Post, was Campbell Brown's colleague and remains Meta's Vice President of Global Product Content Operations. I'm impressed. 20 years ago, she was a regular guest on shows like mine on MSNBC. She was also married to a BBC producer named Mark Orchard, which will become relevant in a moment. I think I've mentioned before that another person who got into NBC via me was Savannah Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie was working at Court TV, assigned to cover the Michael Jackson trial, and we were looking for somebody who would also cover it for us, just my show as well, and who would, as we said then, play. Not just report the news, but have fun with me and my stupid questions. Plus, one of my producers was trying to set her up with me. Though her entree to NBC via Countdown clearly went really well, and hats off to Savannah for that, the setup part went nowhere because at the Michael Jackson trial, she began a relationship with a BBC producer named Mark Orchard. Yep, the guy was married to Anne Kornblut. Soon, Mark Orchard divorced Anne Kornblut to marry Savannah Guthrie. At NBC, Savannah Guthrie was quickly and rightly targeted for stardom. They decided to get her as much anchoring experience as possible, and they threw her in with no experience to anchor an hour of Dayside, which is where they put the people they don't really care about. And sure enough, one day I'm looking at the rundown of the Savannah Guthrie hour of Dayside at MSNBC, and it's one of those moments where you think your eyes are going to fall out of your head. Whatever the first story was that they were having Savannah do it, they had booked as the expert guest to talk about it, to give it some context, a reporter from the Washington Post. Anne Kornblut. That's right. They had scheduled Savannah Guthrie to interview her husband's preceding wife, who he left for her. Savannah evidently did not notice this until she was seated at the desk and about to go on the air. And if you ever want to see an interview in which 8 or 10 questions are asked and answered in 1 minute, and there is no superfluous smiling or banter by the anchor or the guest, find that interview. Oh, God, was that funny. Not for them, especially not for Savannah, because soon she too was the former Mrs. Mark Orchard. I forget the details, but I think he moved on to the next wife that came around the corner. Okay, enough of that. The winner in worst persons, Congressman Jamal Bowman, Democrat of my hometown. You already know about the whole fire alarm thing, which Republicans, when they're not killing off their own speakers of the House, are trying to turn into the worst thing since the crucifixion. Bowman's office responded to that by distributing talking points to fellow Democrats and other perceived friends. One of the points read, quote, Republicans need to instead focus their energy on the Nazi members of their party before anything else. Republicans howled, after which Bowman tweeted an apology, quote, I just became aware that in our messaging guidance there was inappropriate use of the term Nazi without my consent. Huh. Congressman Paul Gosar traveled to the border with a blogger who has praised Nazi Germany. Congressman Rosendale, he posed with neo-Nazis. The Republican nominee in the Illinois 3rd in 2018 is a Holocaust denier who claimed to be the head of the American Nazi Party. Trump had dinner with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West, and he keeps posting globalist and Israeli loyalty stuff and warnings to American Jews. And he used to read from a book of Hitler's speeches that he kept in his bedroom. Should I go on? So, Congressman Bowman, your office said there were Nazis in the Republican Party? There are Nazis in the Republican Party! Why did you apologize? Congressman Jamal, they're Nazis, sir. You called them Nazis. That's what Nazis are called. Nazis. Bowman, today's worst person in the world! Finally, to the number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me. And every time the baseball playoffs roll around, I am flashed back to one of the 16 postseasons I have covered. I'm old. 5 of them as part of the actual game broadcasts. And they will not hang the 1999 American League Championship Series in any kind of sports art museum. There was bad pitching, bad defense, bad hitting, and especially bad sportsmanship by players and fans alike. But for me, covering the New York Yankees through all 5 games from the unique vantage point of a corner of their dugout, it was perfection. The good stuff started in Game 3 on Saturday, October 16th, 1999, and it featured the return of the former Red Sox hero Roger Clemens in the uniform of the hated Yanks to Fenway Park, Boston. I don't have much time for Roger Clemens, but I was a witness to 2 occasions, possibly the only 2 occasions of his life, when he received the raw deal rather than dishing it out. The fans at Boston's Fenway Park blamed Clemens for leaving the Old Town team 2 years previously when it was a decision actually made by Red Sox management. So they serenaded and booed him out of that game after just 15 batters and just over 2 innings, and our Fox TV cameras caught them tearing down Roger Clemens' banners, which hung outside the park. Poor Roger, completely rattled, fell apart like a $12 fake Rolex, and from where I sat between the third base camera and the Yankee dugout, you could see he was ashen. The game got out of hand quickly, a theme for the series. Boston led 13-0 in the 7th inning. One of the oddities of my seat was that between me and the Yankee bench was a low railing and very ancient chicken wire fence that had been painted over annually for something like since the First World War. But next to the fence, on the player's side, was the dugout bathroom. It was really just a door and a urinal. So at some point, every Yankee player came down to that end of the dugout, and almost always they said, "Hi," and then, "Excuse me a minute." Late in the game, as it got dark, the Yankees' superb Cuban emigre pitcher Orlando El Duque Hernandez made that trek and said, "Hi," but did not go into the tiny bathroom in the dugout at Fenway Park. Instead, he sat down on the steps right next to the little chicken wire fence, and he said, "Keith, can I ask you a question?" I was startled. The official line was, El Duque Hernandez did not speak any English. I pointed this out to him. He laughed. "You'll keep my secret? You know how much time I save not doing interviews in English?" He got an occasional conjugation wrong. Otherwise, his English was perfect. He got to his question. "Keith, why'd you leave SportsCenter? You and Dan were so good. Way downtown, bang. They're not going to get 'em." I suspect anybody sitting in the stands in the 10 rows nearest me could hear my laughter. "Orlando, I left SportsCenter before you left Cuba. How did you see us?" He said, "We have nothing in Cuba, but we have baseball fields and we have satellites. It's deep and I don't think it's playable." I was stunned. I had already discovered that nearly every American-born Major League player of 1999 knew me by voice, let alone by sight. But this Cuba thing and El Duque reciting my old SportsCenter catchphrases was a genuine surprise. "Oh, yes, you and Dan. You teach me a lot of my English. What's the one for the hockey? Can't believe I shook that guy's freaking hand. I love that. Why'd you leave?" I tried to explain it was mostly geography, that if when he had pitched briefly in the International League he ever faced the team in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, that was kind of where ESPN was, only it was more remote, much smaller town. "Oh," El Duque said, "like Cuba, but with snow." And I said, "Yeah, that was it. Exactly. And now I was living in Los Angeles and I owned a big house on the beach. Okay, I get it. Listen, you see me in the park, you say hi. There's nobody around, we talk, okay? If I say nothing, don't be offended. I'm just making sure everybody still knows I don't speak English." Orlando Hernandez did not get here until he was 32 years old. He pitched until he was 41. If he'd gotten here when he was 22, he'd be in the Hall of Fame, and then he would have been the color man on the Game of the Week. He pitched 3 years for the Yankees and 2 for the Mets while I lived in New York, and it was always a pleasure to see him. "Keith, you still collecting baseballs? You want this one? I walked Barry Bonds with this one." So that was Game 3 on the Saturday. On the Sunday, I awoke to see my picture in the Boston Globe. In those days, the newspapers all used to have columnists who wrote about nothing but TV and radio sportscasts. No, seriously. I had been a sportscaster on local TV in Boston 15 years earlier in 1984, and I'd been to Fenway Park as long before as 1966, and yet I had grown up a Yankee fan in New York. I explained that even then, I was also a fan of the long-suffering Red Sox fans. Now, this was too complicated for some people at the Boston Globe, which quoted me correctly as saying, "I always felt an affinity with the fans," but then under my picture in the article used the caption, "Olbermann, Red Sox fan." Still wondering how they got that wrong, I did my pregame TV stuff for Fox, then climbed over the little chicken wire fence back into my spot for in-game dugout reporting. And as the top of the first inning began of the 4th game, the Yankees leadoff man Chuck Knobloch moved towards the plate, and as he did, it was the cleanup hitter Bernie Williams walking towards me, presumably to use that little urinal in a closet. Wrong again. It's Meet Keith weekend. "Hey, Keith, he said in his lyrical voice, extending a hand to shake. Bernie Williams, like I didn't know who it was. Say, listen, I was reading the paper. Are you a Red Sox fan? For a moment, I put aside the fact that the playoff game, had now started, and the guy up 3 batters from now was asking me about a typo in the Boston Globe. Bernie Williams was never accused of burning himself out with too much competitive focus. That's just who he was. I explained the mistake as quickly as I could. Oh, I thought so. Okay, good. I'm glad, because you can be a fan of anybody you want, but I don't think it would be right to have a Red Sox fan in our dugout. I agreed with him. Just as Chuck Knobloch singled and the number 2 hitter, Derek Jeter, advanced to the plate, and the 3rd hitter, Paul O'Neill, went out to the on-deck circle. And that's when Bernie Williams surprised me more than Orlando Hernandez had. Plus, Bernie went on, doesn't your mom still have those seats like 10 rows back of our dugout at Yankee Stadium? This was before my mother became famous for getting hit by a very badly thrown ball the next year. I asked Bernie Williams how the hell he knew where my mother sat. Well, you've had seats there since the 70s, haven't you? I just stared at him. Oh, Keith, it's my job to know that. I said, no, it isn't. It's your job to play center field for the Yankees. This was just about the time Derek Jeter grounded out and Paul O'Neill left the on-deck circle and Bernie Williams was supposed to be in the on-deck circle. I know your mom. I see her. Nice lady. So anyway, I interrupted him. Bernie, Jeter just grounded out and Knobloch went to second and O'Neill is up with 1 out. Shouldn't you get out there? He looked back at the field of play. Oh, yeah, you're right. He stuck out his hand again. Nice visiting with you. Let's talk more later. And just double-checking, you're not a Red Sox fan, right? Bernie Williams got 3 hits in that game. Another New York sports reporter once said that if he concentrated on baseball, really concentrated, Bernie Williams would either be so good that he would hit 400, or he would be so stressed out that he would become a serial killer. In this game, the Yankees scored 6 runs in the 9th, and there was a play so controversial that when the Red Sox manager got himself ejected over it, the home fans littered the field with debris. Almost all of it was just plastic soda bottles, but still, there was a couple of flasks thrown, too. Yankees manager Joe Torre ordered his team off the field and play was suspended as the plastic bottles continued to fly, and via my earpiece, which I listened to even if Chris Matthews never listened to his, my producer ordered me onto the field, and I did as I was told, and I sat up in front of the camera right in front of the dugout full of Yankee players. A plastic bottle whizzed past my head, and I half wondered if Bernie Williams had thrown it just in case I was a Red Sox fan. Almost immediately, a Fenway Park security guy started swearing at me in Boston and told me if I didn't get off the field and into the seats immediately, he'd have me arrested. This time I could actually hear some of the Yankees laughing. Get over that fence right now, sit your backside down in that seat and do not move. My producer heard all this through my microphone and told me to comply. I didn't even look around. I just went over the fence, I sat down in the front row where I'd been ordered to, and that's when the guy sitting next to me said, "Hi!" And I realized the guy sitting next to me was George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees. I said, "Hi, you want to say something about this on TV?" And George, who loved me as I loved him, said, "Sure." And my producer heard all this through to the microphone as well. The announcers immediately threw it to me, and I said 7 words. "George Steinbrenner, your thoughts on all this?" He proceeded to very pleasantly blame the Red Sox fans for being drunk, blame Fenway security for letting a riot start, blame baseball officials for not immediately forfeiting the game to his club, and blame the Boston manager for inciting the crowd. I had said to George I would ask a follow-up, but you seem to have covered everything, and so I threw it back to the play-by-play booth. Steinbrenner's remarks made every newspaper in the country, and in many accounts I was noted as the interview, and frankly, I didn't really do anything. The next night, the Yankees won the series in 5 games, and the 5th game was devoid of Cuban pitchers confiding they were fans, or Bernie Williams quizzing me about my fandom, or me being ordered onto the field during a riot only to be thrown off of it and directly into the seat next to the owner of the Yankees. All I had to do on this night was get into the Yankee clubhouse 2 innings before the game ended so I could cover the celebrating players and the award presentation. The excitement of the weekend clearly was over. I would just say hi to these guys. They'd throw champagne in my direction, and then I'd throw it back to Joe Buck. I was on a platform, bleached in a camera light as the technicians checked their stuff. The game was still going on when the clubhouse door slammed open and in strutted the Yankee second baseman Chuck Knobloch. He was swearing profusely, profoundly, and proficiently. He had been having trouble throwing ground balls away, and as the eighth inning started, Yankee manager Torre had removed him, denying him a chance to be in the on-field celebration of the pennant. Knobloch was enraged, so enraged that he never saw me or the platform or the camera lights. He used all the known expletives and directed all of them all at his own manager. The Yankees PR guy, a childhood friend of mine, rushed over to insist that I could not report what I had just heard. He was a little shocked when I agreed with him. "I'm here as a lighting prop," I told him. Knobloch has a perfect right to expect there be no reporters in the clubhouse during the game. If he says it again afterwards, I'll say I heard it just now. Otherwise, I'm not saying anything. There is, of course, a punchline even to this and this extraordinary weekend. The next summer, Chuck Knobloch's career as a second baseman ended because he completely lost the ability to throw an ordinary, uncomplicated baseball to first base. Since similar cases of the yips seemed to afflict players whose baseball-centric fathers had gotten sick or jailed or something, and Knobloch's dad had just entered the final stages of Alzheimer's, it was probably that. The last disastrous throw he made the next year, on June 17th, 2000, bounced off the Yankee dugout and spun weirdly and hit a woman in the box seats. The woman was my mother. The one where Bernie Williams knew where she sat. All the things that followed, since I was in the studio that day doing the highlights for the Fox Game of the Week, they require their own segment of this. But the one thing that has always mystified me was how Chuck Knobloch did not know not to throw the ball where he did, because at some point, Bernie Williams must have warned him, hey, Chuck, don't do it there. That's where Keith Olbermann's mother sits. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown has come to you from the Vin Scully studio at the Olbermann Broadcasting Empire in New York. The music you've heard was, for the most part, arranged, produced, and performed by the Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel. Brian Ray handled guitars, bass, and drums. John Philip Chanel did orchestration and keyboards, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including other Beethoven tunes, arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. Sports music is courtesy of ESPN Inc. and was written by Mitch Warren Davis. We call it the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Howard Feynman. Everything else was pretty much my fault. That's Countdown for this, the 1,002nd day since Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Convict him now while he's gagged. And while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow, bulletins as the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.